Okay. Whew. Okay. Okay, so what I thought we'd talk about today, after the class yesterday, there were a number of questions asked, which I thought were really pertinent and very fundamental questions for understanding Chassidus generally. And more specifically, these are ideas which the Rebbe has elaborated upon in a much broader way than any of his predecessors. Okay? So I thought the question was, one of the questions which came up just as we were concluding the shiur yesterday was truth. Now, we spoke once before about truth and absolute truth, right? There's emes, there's truth, and there's emes la'amite, and there's absolute truth. So I want to talk a little bit more today about the difference between truth and absolute truth, between emes and emes la'amite. If you recall, the Rambam says in Yesod HaTorah, because we're learning Rambam, right? One of the things which the Rambam says concerning Hashem is that ein emes ka'amitose. There is no truth like the truth of Hashem. There may be truth, but it's nothing compared to the truth of Hashem. So what does that actually mean? What do we mean there's no truth except for the truth of Hashem? What about maths, for example? Let's say 2 plus 2. Is that an absolute truth? Is 2 plus 2 always equal 4? You would think so, right? 2 plus 2 equals 4. That's the truth, undeniable truth, right? For sure, okay? So let's think about that for a second. So this cup right now, it's in a physical place, right? It's a physical place. Good. So I could say that it's if I wanted to give it like scientific coordinates, what would I say about it? I would say it's, so and so many degrees north and so many degrees east, okay?
Are they on the call? Just ask them to tell them to mute it.
Ladies, can you just mute yourselves because we can hear a bit of background noise, please?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So if I give you its coordinates and tell you it's so and so many degrees north and so many degrees south, east, I should say, is that true? Right? Is it absolutely true?
Not absolute. Depends.
Why is it absolutely true?
Relative to what?
No, I just gave you coordinates.
Well, you can move it.
I gave you coordinates.
Depends where you're standing, right?
No, I gave you coordinates. I gave you north-south coordinates. I gave you east-west coordinates. So
Yes,
exactly
because
where
it's
it was.
taking up space within a specific time. Yes, it's a truth. An absolute truth within this.
It's a truth for now.
Within
For
this
now.
Right.
world, within this
Okay,
sphere.
but correct. But take a look. Take a little bit more, right?
But for now it is. If you
Yeah,
move
look
it,
at this. Look at the cup. Look at the cup. So I gave you coordinates north. I gave you coordinates east. What about this way? Did I give you coordinates up and down? No. So is it true? But yeah, it's only true on a certain plane, on a certain vertical plane. It's not true up there, and it's not true down there. So I've given you the truth, but you can't call this absolute truth, can you? It's only true at a particular vertical level. It's not true absolutely.
No.
Even in the physical world, it's not true absolutely. Okay? So again, if someone comes along and tells you, for example, the cup is here, right? And they give you not only north and east coordinates, they also give you vertical coordinates. Now, is that absolutely true?
Again, within this world, within this sphere.
Okay, but elaborate a little bit more on that. And talk about we're in this world. Within this world, is it true?
if it's at this time, at this time.
At this time.
Yes.
Right, so that you need. So you can't say it's there. You've got to also specify the time.
Yeah.
Remember, I don't want to say Lahavdil because he was a Yid, but Einstein made us understand that space-time is a thing, right? So you've got to give it the fourth coordinate, you've got to give it the coordinate of time too. So if I give it north, south, east, west, up, down coordinates, I don't bother giving you the time, it might be true at a particular time, but you cannot say it's absolutely true, right? So we have to be very careful when we talk about truth, right? Because unless we define the truth in absolute terms, we're going to have a problem. Now, so let me ask you further. Okay, does this cup exist? Right? Does this particular cup exist altogether? I gave you the time, I gave you the space, I gave you all of its four coordinates, I gave you coordinates of time, and I gave you coordinates of space, right? Now, is it now true? Is it now true?
Not if Einod Milvado.
Huh?
Not if Einod Milvado. We know that
Right.
nothing exists apart from Hashem.
Okay, so then you have, correct, so
Reality.
you have what, Atahu Ad Shaloi Nivra Olam. We say, you are Hashem before the world was created. We say in davening, Atahu Mishan Nivra Olam. You are Hashem after the world was created, right? And then we say, Hashem Melech, Hashem Moloch, Hashem Yimlech. Hashem will live even after, Achri Kichleis HaKel, after everything, Hashem will still be there. So the world is in existence. When is the world in existence? As long as Hashem puts it into existence. The moment Hashem stops putting existence, it's not there. So in absolute terms, can you say it's really there? Think about it. Can you really say that the world is there? You can't say that the world is there because it's only there, so to speak, at the mercy, at the grace of God, right? The mercy of God, it's there.
But then we have
Now in
to say that
Chassidus,
there-
now let me say this. Excuse me, sorry. In Chassidus, it speaks about this. In Chassidus, it says there's certain rivers which are called Nahores HaMachazvin, false rivers. Why are they called false rivers? The reason why they're called false rivers, it says in Chassidus is, I mean, it's a concept in Gemara, but the Chassidus explains it. Why they're called false rivers?
They don't flow all the time.
Because they don't
stop.
flow all together.
There's
Right. So in other words, and it says a river which stops flowing once in 7 years is considered to be a false river, right? Because why? But it's there, right? But it's only there some of the time. So then Siddur says, and therefore the world too. How many thousands of years is the world? 6,000 years. Come the 7,000th year, and then the world's existence will be totally different than it is now. I don't want to say it won't exist, but it will be totally godly. So therefore the world in that sense is also not true. It's only true because it's only true within the creative framework, okay? So this is important to understand. We can't just speak about, something is true. We have to be very clear about what we mean when we say something is true.
But everything in the world is transitory. Everything.
Correct.
Even, we are too.
Oh,
In
so-
100 years from now, we'll be little neshamas floating around. Or
Okay,
reincarnations.
okay.
Mashiach will be here. How dare you?
Sorry. Oh, no, we won't. No, we'll be living forever and ever at the ideal age.
Right, okay. Okay, so
We're all
Where's
gonna
my
be
mother?
18.
Whatever you want.
we can kind of get this idea right, all right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Wait,
Now-
but I need to ask. So I need to just clarify one thing because
Yes.
we do say. So it's true that Einod Milvado, but we do say Bereshis bara, and therefore Hashem has created. So there is a truth because we can't disregard Hashem's.
no
Bria.
question about it. We didn't say it's not a truth. We say, Zeram ein emes kamitose. There is no truth like His truth. Meaning to say that when it comes to the Eibishter, when it comes to Hashem, it's absolutely true. It's beyond anything we can understand. We have a truth within a certain realm, right? It's not untrue to say, for example, when I've given you the northern or southern and eastern western coordinates, and I tell you that something, it's not true, it's just not totally true, right? You haven't given the vertical coordinates. And if I give you all three coordinates of north, up, down, north, south, east, west, that's also true. But I haven't given you the fourth coordinate. I haven't given the time coordinate. So there's a kind of truth to it, but you don't want to say it's an absolutely true, because someone will be standing up there, and you've only given north and east coordinates. He doesn't know what you're talking about. For him, it's not true, right? Or someone is living in a different time. For him, it's not true. Okay, I think we get the idea. So what about space itself, right? I'm not talking about what fills the space. The cup is filling the space. What about space itself? Is space something which is true? Right? Is space something which is true? In other words, is there really a space? Okay, the world won't exist, time won't. Things won't change in time, but is the concept of time and the concept of space, are they true or not?
Well, they're true because Hashem created them.
Well, yes, after Hashem created, it's true within the realm of creation. Within that realm of creation, it's true.
And then there is no concept of time.
Okay, so here, I'll just give you a way of understanding that, which, the Rebbe in the famous Sikha of Noach, where he says that in the 600th year of the life of Noach, he says that the great depths of the Hermes opened up, right? And the Rubis Shemayim, and the windows of the heaven opened up. So the Rebbe quotes from the Zohar, and the Zohar says, in the 600th year of the 6th millennium, right? There's going to also be an opening up of above and below, right? Above is the divine wisdom. This is when Chassidus really came to the fore. And the below is the scientific wisdom, which is when all the phenomenal discoveries of science of the 19th and the early 20th century came to the fore. Okay, so we can learn a lot from science, and the Rebbe actually gives one example in that Sikha of what we can learn. He doesn't mention Einstein by name, but it's clear that he's talking about Einstein, of his equivalence of mass and energy equals mc squared, right? But I'm not talking about that particular idea right now, but that generally speaking, if we take a look at if we take a look at Einstein said something like, is an inch really an inch? Let me ask you, is an inch really an inch? Is an hour really an hour? Is an hour really an hour? Is an inch really an inch? So we think, you take out a ruler and you measure an inch, and it's an inch. We have an issue with council in our backyard, right?
Yeah.
And we have to put up a fence, and the council came and said, or the inspector came and said, it's supposed to be 1,500 mil, and it's 1,450.
Oh.
It's like this much, no good. Right? No. So for us, an inch is an inch, a centimeter is a centimeter. But is that really true? Is an inch really an inch, or a centimeter really a centimeter? Is an hour really an hour? No. How do we know that? Professor Einstein told us. It depends how fast you're traveling. If you're traveling very, very fast, then space contracts and time contracts, right? Therefore, he's got this famous thing. If you go into the famous paradox that they mentioned, if you go into a very, very fast spaceship, which is going almost the speed of light, right? Then you're able to get to your destination really quickly, right? Yeah. And you won't age, and you come back to Earth, and your twin brother is 80 years old, and you've only became 2 years older, because for you time contracted. And they've been able to demonstrate that experimentally. Of course, they haven't sent anyone up to space, but they've been able to do it with light beams. And they're able, it's pretty clear that it can be done, theoretically. Can't do it in practice, because I don't know that we can reach such speeds. So time is not really time. Time is not absolute, I should say, and space is not absolute. But it goes more than that. It goes more than that. And that is, both according to Einstein, which is the depths of wisdom coming up, and also Chassidus, time is created and space is created. So if someone comes and asks you, Why did Hashem only create the world 5,763 years ago? Why didn't He create it 5,764 years ago? You know what the answer is? There's no such thing as 5,764. It didn't exist. The number doesn't exist. There was no universe then. It didn't exist. It began in 5,000. Time began 563 years ago. There was no time before then. There was no space before then. Right? Nothing existed before then. Didn't exist. Now people find this extremely difficult to get their heads around. Because we have no conception of what no space is and no time is. We can understand things within our framework. We can't understand things which are beyond our framework. We don't understand what non-existence is, what non-space is. We have no understanding of that. So therefore you think, wow, this is, okay, I'll accept it. Amunah Shlema. Right? I have faith. You know who else accepts it? Basically, a slightly different way, but who accepts it also? Scientists. They accept it. Why? Because today the accepted theory is called the Big Bang Theory, right? So it's easy enough to say the Big Bang Theory, right? The Big Bang. But what does the Big Bang Theory actually mean? What does it mean? And the reason I'm saying this to you is so that you be able to try to understand with your mind ideas which it says in Chassidus. And sometimes, you know, it says, when you hear something from a goy, he wasn't a goy in this particular case for Einstein, but when you hear something from a goy, you become more convinced of when you read about it in Torah, right? The scientist also says that. Lahavdil. But the reality is, think about this for a second, what does a Big Bang Theory mean? We think that all of this in front of us is like, it's really real, right? And we think that, you know, you look up at the night sky and you see the planets, and if you've got really good telescopes, you can see into, you know, the furthest constellations beyond this universe. You can see phenomenal things out there, right? And it's huge, it's massive. It's, you know, tiny, with a tiny, you know, like Hashem says to Abraham, lift up your eyes, look at the stars. Amazing. Now, what does science postulate happened in the Big Bang? That the entire existence, all the mass and all the energy, everything that you see, right, was in a little tiny little microscopic, more than microscopic little dot. All of the energy was there. And that was all of time and all of space. What was outside? No one knows what was outside of it. But everything was in that. All of time, all of space, all of matter, all of energy, everything was in there. And then boom, right? There was a Big Bang and it came into existence.
But where did that
So, hold on a second. So people say, how could you possibly say that the Eibishter created the world in 6 days? Well, hold on a second.
How long did it take for the
What about this little dot that you believe that this dot happened and this dot all of a sudden became a, that's easier to understand? That you can get your head around? That you can get, but you got 6 days business you can't get. But this thing you can't get? So you know what? I mean, the notion of time and space is also a created thing. In Chassidus it says, and those of you who are learning Tanya these days, or you're learning Shara Yichud Be'emunah in the Chittas every day. So there it speaks about that all time and all space comes from Malchus the Atzilus, from the level of Malchus Atzilus, which is the level of kingship Atzilus. Beyond that, what happens in Atzilus itself? No time, no space. When I'm talking about time and space here, I'm not talking about physical time and space, because there's only place where there's physical time and space is in this world. But there is also a spiritual concept of time and space too, okay? And that's what exists in the higher worlds, a spiritual concept of time and space, different than the time and space of our world. But even that doesn't exist higher than Atzilus. Malchus Atzilus, I should say. So all of time and space, not only the physical time and space, but also the spiritual concepts of time and space. And I don't want to elaborate on that because we'll just go too far afield today. You know, even that doesn't exist. So everything is really created, okay? But until you get to Atzilus, until you get there is some kind of notion even in the spiritual worlds of time. So let's talk for a moment about the relativity of time from a Jewish perspective. So it says that great tzaddikim can see into the future, right? So how do they do this? What's their trick, How do we kind of... So it says like this, it says that if you're standing one tefach, spiritually speaking, a tefach is that much. Spiritually speaking, if you spend one tefach above the ground, you're able to see things differently, right? Like you understand this a little bit too, right? If you're on an airplane, you see the world differently than when you're on the ground, right? On the ground, everything is you go up high and you're able to get a more bird's eye view, right? The reality is time is like that too. Time is the same thing. Remember, time is also dimension. So time is like that too. So if you manage to be able to lift yourself up to a higher world, time doesn't have the same meaning that it has over here. So over here, a day is a day, and a minute is a minute, right? And an inch is an inch, etc., etc. What happens if you're a little bit more spiritual, right? Then it could be that 10 years you see in a moment, or 100 years you see in a moment, or more spiritual you can see 1,000 years in a moment. It says, for example, there's an expression that it says, for example, it says that Yom Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the day of the Holy One, blessed be He, so to speak, is 1,000 years. I mean to say, in a moment, you in a day, it's everything there already. So what is a Navi, or what, not necessarily, what is a spiritual person? Spiritual person is someone who doesn't have the limited perspective. Everything by us is very, very real. Right? For us, this is real. And it is real for us on our level, but there is a reality which is beyond our reality. And in that reality, beyond our reality, things can be seen from a much broader and all-inclusive perspective, okay? So I say we have a better understanding now about truth, right? So something may be true on one level. It may not necessarily be so true on another level. Depends where you're going. When you're dealing beyond time, it's different. So I started off the shir saying something else. I started off the shir explaining is 2 and 2 really 4, okay? And of course everyone's going to say that 2 and 2 of course equals 4, okay?
I told you I work with 10-year-olds. And they're very challenging these days.
Okay, good, Baruch Hashem. So when you're having 2 and 2 equals 4, and we accept that 2 and 2 equals 4, and that's something which is part of our reality, right? So we would say that 2 and 4 equals 4 is far more true, for example, than this cup being full of water. Why? Because today the cup's full of water, tomorrow it's not going to be full of water, right? Right? Or if the cup's full of water here, it's not full of water there. So it's not something which is true in all places, in all times, in all circumstances. But 2 and 2 equals 4 is apparently something which is true in all time, in all places, in all circumstances. It doesn't need any coordinates. It's just true. It's beyond the physical, right? It's not like the concept, for example, of a physical table or a physical book, etc., which may only be true at a particular place and a particular time, particular coordinates. 2 and 2 equals 4 is true everywhere that we understand, right? And apparently 2 and 2 is equal 4 is true also in the spiritual worlds. Apparently, right? Now the question is whether 2 and 2 are really 4 is really an absolute concept or not, or is it also a created concept? Is it a created concept or is it an absolute concept?
Created concept.
Is it
Okay.
true beyond Malchus of Basilis?
Huh?
Is it true beyond
Correct.
Malchus of
Yeah,
Basilis?
okay, good. Absolutely. So is it true or not? So let me first of all explain, let's just first of all try and understand whether 2 and 2 is 4. And I'll just give you some examples I thought up, and I hope they're true examples, they're correct examples, but I was thinking, right? So you have, and this is what, the first thing I'm going to say is actually what it says in Chassidus, so there's no question that that's true. So, for example, you've got at the beginning of Ayin Beis, at the beginning of the very famous Maimah Ayin Beis, which the Rebbe wanted to have published. If you remember, there was a thing the Rebbe was very, very keen. I think it was 1978 on publishing Ayin Beis, which is one of the deepest treatises of Chassidus, written by the Rebbe said, and then written by the Rebbe Rashab. So, at the very beginning of that, he speaks about letters and words. So, let's take an example. I think from if I remember correctly, it's unfortunately been a long time since I learned it. He speaks about the word Baruch, if I'm not mistaken there, but I'm going to give you a simple example. Speak about the word Aleph Beis. So Aleph is a concept, right? And Beis is a concept, right? And each one represents a particular kind of sound, a concept. What happens when you put Aleph Beis together?
It creates something else.
New energy.
It's something which is not contained within Aleph by itself, not contained within Beis in itself. All of a sudden, you've got the concept of Father, which in Chassidus and basically calls Oil al Kolona. You end up having a light which transcends the individual letters. Here you've got one, and all of a sudden, well, I've got something else which is beyond the one and one.
That's the thing. Do not numbers hold the same power, the same concept?
Okay, so here we go. Or the other way around. I'll continue through it. We'll come back in a second. And then, or you have the other way around. You've got Beis and Aleph, right? Again, boy. Again, where did that come from? Right? Okay. What about if we try to understand it from a more scientific perspective, right? Chemistry perspective. So you've got a wonderful hydrogen atom, which does a lot of good, right? Hydrogen is great, you can do stuff with hydrogen. Then you got a couple of oxygen atoms, and they're pretty good too, right? We need them to live with. And then we bring them together. What do you have? you have water. Where did the water come from? You had two gases over here. Where does water come from? So you've got this here, the two separate, and all of a sudden, boom, something else comes which is beyond both of them.
So the concept.
Okay, what I'm saying is that it's not out of the question. All I'm trying to demonstrate is it's not out of the question that you could have a 1 and 1 and it could equal more than 2, right? I'm not saying it does. I'm just telling you that the concept of having two things combined and then having something greater emerge from that is not a foreign concept. It's not something that we can't understand. It's not something that we can't grasp. Now, the fact is that the Eibishter created the world in such a manner that 1 and 1 actually equals 2. You have a regular number 1 in maths. That concept is basically true, right? As far as we know. However, it's not easily provable. Maths is not easily provable. Now, there was a German fellow called Kurt Gödel, and in 1931, he did something fantastic. And he came up with Gödel's theorem. And what Gödel's theorem is essentially is that no mathematical system can be proved from within itself. You have to accept certain things on faith, basically. That they're true, you accept that they're true, but you cannot prove that they're true, right? So in other words, there are certain things that we all think, wow, this is, of course, but it's not provable. And the reason why it's not provable is because essentially it's coming from something beyond us. So therefore it's not like the world is self-consistent and self-reliable. It's not. Even within maths, which is the queen of sciences, right? There's nothing greater than mathematics. It's not a physical thing. Even within maths, there are certain things which are beyond our capacity to be able to say, well, I can show you absolutely, I'm going to prove this in court. You can't prove it in court. Sorry, can't be proved. Once you accept certain things, then certain axioms, etc., then you can accept, but you've taken certain things on faith in order to be able to prove other things. But the initial thing, you can't prove. Okay? Why is this so important? Important is because once we understand this, we can understand that seichel, intellect, is not the be-all and end-all that we think it is. It's also not emes la'amite. It's not absolute truth. And therefore, again, if you've been learning Shara Yichud in Chitas, and I know you had some shiurim with it with Rabbi Hoch, then one of the things it says in Shara Yichud, it says that as far as the Eibishter is concerned, Seichel, Chochma, speaks about that, Chochma specifically, is like Asiya Gufnis, it's like a physical thing. Right? What does he mean when he says it's like Asiya Gufnis? What does he mean when he say Seichel is like a physical thing? We don't think Seichel is a physical thing. We think Seichel is an absolute. There are concepts we consider to be absolute concepts. I gave you an example just a moment ago. But by the Eibishter, they're a physical thing. And then the Alter Rebbe says something phenomenal. The Alter Rebbe says that if someone would say that you cannot touch Seichel with your hand, right? You would laugh at him. What are you talking about? Seichel is not touchable. So what do you mean you cannot? What do you think? It's a stupid statement. You cannot touch Seichel with your hand. It's so obvious. Why would you say such a stupid thing? It doesn't need to be said, right? So then the Alter Rebbe says, in the same way, right? As far as the Eibishter is concerned, right? If you'll say that the Eibishter has any connection to Chochmah whatsoever, anyone listen will laugh at that. Because just as we can't touch Seichel cannot touch God. God is so much above Seichel that Seichel cannot grasp God at all. Right? Cannot grasp.
Of course it can't. It's a physical thing.
Oh, okay, not everyone agreed with this. This is a concept. This is a concept of the Mekubalim and the Chassidus and the Maharal. So the Maharal comes along, and the Maharal says, and he actually argues with the Rambam, because the Rambam, listen to this. The Rambam says, the Rambam says God is the knower and the knowledge and the object itself, the known and the knowledge and the knower, all the one. And here the Maharal says that's not true. If that was true, you should call God HaSeichel Baruch Hu. Why do you call him HaKadosh Baruch Hu? You call God HaSeichel Baruch Hu. Why do we call God HaKadosh Baruch Hu? What does Kadosh mean? Kadosh means, correct, moved out, something which is totally beyond us. We call Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's totally beyond us. Because for God, Seichel is like a physical thing. It was also created. Even though it's true in all of our realm, right? So, let's take this a little bit further now, okay?
It's proof of that so many things happen in our world and our lives which completely defy Seichel. Like, that you see, even in a rational sense.
And absolutely, and that's one of the proofs. And without going to all of the detail, that's one of the proofs that it says in the Rebbe's Maimorim, and this is a beautiful thing, that even in the physical world, there are things that defy science to explain. They just do not make any sense according to science. And then the Rebbe says, not because we haven't yet reached the capacity to understand them, but because they're in essence not understandable. In other words, God implanted into the world certain things which are not understandable, we go contrary to our understanding, in order that we should figure out that we're not all that we think we are, that there's something well beyond us. So therefore there are certain things in the world which are beyond our capacity to understand. Again, not because we don't yet have the capacity to understand, because they're actually beyond understanding. They don't come from a place, they come from a place which is beyond Seichel.
But
right?
Let's say we take that paradigm and we say that on some level there is what's called a justice system by Hashem that is above and beyond what we understand.
Okay.
But in Hashem's realm, there is a divine justice system. We will look at it and we'll say it's irrational, it doesn't make sense, and we will never get our head around it. But can we ever get to the realization that beyond what our limited minds can absorb, there is a system by Hashem, which functions on absolute truths.
Okay,
Or is that
the Eibishter creates absolute truth. So let me continue.
sorry.
Yeah, let me continue. I get the question. Let me continue for a moment, and then we'll see if we understand a bit better. So let's take now the concept of, in Torah there are different kind of mitzvahs, right? There's edus, like right, Pesach and Sukkot, etc. They all testify to certain great events in our history. Then there's mishpatim, right? And mishpatim are things that are logical. For example, don't murder, don't steal, don't commit adultery. All these things are logical. And then there are chukim, things which are beyond logic, right? Like kashrus, etc., which is essentially beyond logic, especially the details of kashrus, etc. Okay, so let's talk about mishpatim, though. We'll talk about the things which are apparently logical. So I'm going to say, is it logical? Why do you not steal? Right?
It's not really logical, to be honest. Absolutely not logical.
Becky, before we go to the why it's not logical, I'd like to hear why it is logical. Why is it logical not to steal?
Why would I not? I honestly, and I don't think that there is a kid that I know that hasn't at least tried it once. The only
but the
reason you
concept
don't
is
steal is because
take from
somebody
someone
teaches
else.
you that you're not allowed to.
But society couldn't function if everybody.
Yeah,
was
I know,
stealing.
but somebody
concept.
teaches
The
you
concept is
that. But
wrong.
somebody teaches you that society needs to
The
function
concept
like
is
this.
wrong.
But tachlis,
That's where it begins.
from within you, would you not steal?
What do you
I
mean
don't
that?
know about you, but
Becky,
I
one
for
thing. What do you
sure.
mean the concept's wrong?
I mean that it's wrong. It's bad,
It's bad. Okay.
right?
Who
Bad to see.
said so? Who?
But if anybody-
Hashem
But
said
if
so.
everybody stole, it would
for
even
it.
out. You would even out. If everybody stole, it would even out.
too.
Yeah.
Do you understand? It
For
would,
exactly.
well,
Yeah.
I took this from you,
Take it.
and he takes that from me,
Take-
and then I take it again,
Exactly, yeah.
and it always evens out. Because I
No,
have.
it doesn't even
And
out
for-
because it becomes a jungle. It becomes
Yeah.
the
It's a
strongest.
free for all.
Yeah.
Okay.
The strongest can
Take it a little bit
In
more
every
severe.
society,
We pull this out.
It's a taboo to steal, like in every society.
But people stealing from us every day. Coles is stealing from us. Kafa in front of our
All right.
face.
Take it a little bit further. What about murder?
All the big corporates. they're
Take it about
stealing from
murder.
us like there's no
Is murder?
tomorrow.
Is it wrong to murder?
Also not.
Becky would murder too.
I would murder too. Kafa.
I
It depends who you
understand.
murder.
I understand where she's coming
It depends who's in front of you, Becky, doesn't it?
There's a very
So listen. So we understand. Most of us understand at any rate that even if the Torah wouldn't be given, right?
Basic.
There would be certain, even if the Torah wouldn't be given, there would be certain things that, logic demands that we don't do. That's why they call mishpatim, isn't it? The reason why they call mishpatim is because they're things ha'seichel mechayvon, that logic tells us to do, right? That's what's happening. Seichel, logic tells us to do them, okay? The question, however, is whether that's actually true. Does all seichel tell us to do them? No. Right? Well, Becky's not wrong, but let's just do this step by step. So, if I'm allowed to quote, from Mendelssohn. So Mendelssohn comes along and he says, Moses Mendelssohn, right? Famous. He was actually religious, but he went off the right track by saying things like this. Or he was still religious, but his kids went off the right track by saying things that I'm going to tell you now. So he said that the Torah didn't have to put in any of the don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal stuff. We had to figure that ourselves. The whole purpose of Torah, said Moses Mendelssohn, was only for one thing, and that was to tell us about the things we couldn't figure out ourselves. For example, Pesach, Sukkot, etc. We didn't read, there was natural law. We didn't really need the Torah to tell us don't murder, don't steal. Everyone understands that. Remember where he was saying it? He was saying it in Germany, right?
Yeah.
Just
Yeah. Just to clarify who.
But that's what Moses Mendelssohn said, okay? All right, so if I'm allowed to quote him, let me quote this fellow now. Yimach Shmei V'Zichra. You're not allowed to mention his name, so you know what I'm talking about. This is what he says. I am freeing men from the restraints of an intelligence that has taken charge, from the dirty and degrading self-mortifications of a chimera called conscience and morality, and from demands of a freedom and personal independence which only a very few can bear. That's what he says. So Yamach Shmei comes along and he says that the reason why he's fighting the Jews
He's from freedom.
is because he wants to give them freedom from conscience and morality, from the restraints of an intelligence that has taken charge, from the dirty and degrading self-mortifications of conscience and morality. Conscience, he says, is a Jewish invention. It is a mutilation like circumcision. There is no such thing as truth either in the moral or in the scientific sense.
So we're not supposed to have a conscience.
So he can.
Interesting.
Listen, so he says like this. He says,
Jiminy Cricket
and another
and
place
Jiminy
which I
Cricket.
didn't write down here, but I remember reading many years ago. He says, I love the look of the Aryan youth, which are like the beasts of prey. So here you take a look, Yamach Shmei, and what does he say? In the animal kingdom, is murder wrong?
No.
No.
Well, it's not really murder, actually.
No, he's saying
It's instinct.
Is stealing wrong?
Wait.
I don't want to get into the
It's survival.
is stealing wrong? No. You know, an animal's got food. A bigger animal will take the food out of its mouth,
I
right?
beg to differ. This is like a child. What, we should sit children on the floor till they're 20 because they'll just get up and they'll know what's right and wrong.
What we're saying differently is we're saying that there is
No
no
need to teach them.
there's no essential logic, right? Saying that don't murder. Society comes along and figures out don't murder, don't steal, we got to live together, etc., etc. Even by Goyim, the authority, Abish gives evidence there. But did it have to be that way? Is that the way it is in the jungle? Is that the way animals are?
And it wasn't the way before
We're
Noah.
above
you know-
animals. It's a lower.
Yeah, but look who's speaking.
So the
But in
question,
the time of Noah,
let's
there wasn't
let's
before Noah, there wasn't.
listen for a second. Sorry. So we think that the real reason why we don't steal or don't murder, etc., is because our seichel tells us that, right? Now, the way it explains in Chassidus is a little bit different. It says,
Apocalypto?
it's not the seichel which creates the mitzvah, right? It's the mitzvah which creates the seichel. In other words, it's the fact that the Torah comes along and the Torah tells us, don't kill, that's what makes our seichel understand that killing is wrong. It's the fact that the Torah comes along and says, don't steal, that's what makes us understand that seichel is wrong, right?
This is what I'm saying about a child.
And that's why Yamach Shmei comes along and says he wants to free humanity from what he calls the inventions, the Jewish inventions of seichel, of conscience. All this business about looking after the poor, looking after the needy, looking after the orphan, the widow, don't stealing from other people, protecting other people's property. These are Jewish inventions. What does he mean? This comes from God. I don't like God and I don't like his inventions. I don't want to accept it. Again, it's the mitzvah which creates the morality. It's not our seichel, or creates the seichel, I should say. It's not our seichel which creates the mitzvah. It's the mitzvah which it's the mitzvah which creates the seichel. So what we're saying is that all the things that we accept are for sure. Of course, you can't murder. Nothing is. It's all coming from the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Eibishter is the one who put the systems into place. The Eibishter created the systems. Okay? So that's what we mean when we say that the Eibishter is the ultimate truth. We think that what we have over here in this world, time, space, seichel, the truth, that's not where the truth. The ultimate truth comes from that which is and just is. That's what the Eibishter is. He's the one who is. And from the Eibishter comes everything else. Okay? So, you got to think about it a little bit, because it's really a totally different kind of perspective than most people have, right? This is not the normal way people think. And it's only when you kind of compare it to other things, and then you all of a sudden understand, wow, this is what Torah did. Torah basically changed the framework or created the framework of the world, right?
So when
There's an interesting thing in Ochem Chassidus, but I saw once many years ago, that Shamshon Rafal Hersh, he said something very interesting. He says the Torah comes from the word Hora. Hora means to impregnate. Horim are parents, so Hora means to impregnate, right? Ishahara is a pregnant woman. So he says, what is the idea? Is the Abish took something which is out of this world and impregnated the world, put it into the world. So what we're doing is we're going to something. Torah is something which is beyond our understanding. So where does this all take us in terms of what's truth? So this is why the Rambam says the only real truth is the Eibush. The Eibush is emes la'mitei, right? And therefore, ein emes kamitose. There's no truth like the Eibush's truth, right? All other truth is kind of relative on some level or the other. Okay. So now, one of the things which came up when we were talking about yesterday is the Ben Chacham in the Haggadah, right? So the Ben Chacham comes along and he says to you, Ma Eidos v'Achuki v'Mishpatim Asher Tziva Hashem Elokeinu Eschem, which Hashem has commanded you. What is all this stuff about? And the question, and we said yesterday, I mean, what kind of question is that? So it says he's supposed to be in Chacham. He doesn't understand. He doesn't understand what the Eidos and Chukim Mishpatim are all about. What do you mean? What kind of Chacham is that? So then the Rebbe explains the idea of Eidos Chukim Mishpatim on a deeper level. And then the Rebbe says, well, hold on, but he should be understanding that too. And then on a deeper level, and he should be understanding that too, right? A deeper level, 3 different levels the Rebbe goes through. And he should be understanding that too. And then the Rebbe at the end comes along and the Rebbe says, he's not asking what they are. He knows on his level what they are, right? But then he doesn't know anything. All of a sudden he has to realize more, it's beyond me. I don't understand anything. So what do you mean he doesn't understand anything? He didn't. Yesterday he understood it. What do you mean? Today, he woke up in the morning, he doesn't understand anything? Yesterday he understood it very well. He understood all the levels we spoke about. All of a sudden he comes to the realization that Seichel itself is limited, and that really there is something well beyond Seichel, right? And I can understand things to a certain level, but no matter how much I'm going to understand, I understand nothing. And yes, today I'm going to try to really understand, I'm going to get to a certain level, right? But tomorrow I'm going to have to start all over again. I'm going to all of a sudden realize that everything I did till now, so because Torah itself is infinite, and with that we can understand something else. It says that kol tamud tom masha tamud vasik asid l'chadesh halacha l'moshe misinai. Everything that a true Talmud Chacham, like totally unegotistic Chacham, not someone who's trying to be able to prove his own worth, right? Someone who's a true Talmud Chacham is big. If he comes up with something new, then it's halacha l'moshe misinai. It was already said from Moshe and Har Sinai. It's a paradox. It doesn't make sense. It's either new. If it's new, it wasn't said at Har Sinai. If it's said at Har Sinai, then it's not new. So how do we get that? How do we understand that? Is it new or not new? Was it said at Har Sinai? It wasn't said at Har Sinai. What is it? And the Rebbe deals with this question. What are we talking about? It's either a chidush, it's something new, or it's said at Har Sinai. How can it be both? And here the Rebbe explains like this, and it's something which is fascinating, really. So normally speaking, like was said yesterday, and Ms. Blech I think said yesterday, Torah is evolutionary. You build on what you had yesterday, and you get a deeper insight. You build on yesterday, and you get a deeper insight. But that's not what the Rebbe says is a chiddush. And if you look at the beginning of, I mentioned last week, the week before, Sha'ar Yichud Emunah, he says that that's not what a person a really righteous person is doing. He's not just building on what happened before. He's starting all over again. It's something entirely new. He's acting as if he doesn't understand anything, and because he's acting as if he doesn't understand anything, he's able to come up with a totally new insight. The problem is, if you rely too much on what you learned yesterday, you will kind of poison today's thinking with yesterday's thinking. And therefore, you have to go to a stage where you don't consider what you learned yesterday. That's why we find in the Gemara that Reb Zera would fast 100 times to forget the Babylonian Talmud before he learned the Jerusalem Talmud, because otherwise the Babylonian Talmud thinking would contaminate his understanding of the Jerusalem Talmud. So therefore you have to get to the stage you understand that what I understood yesterday may not in fact be true for today. It was true yesterday, but it may not be true for today. And therefore, because that's what I'm going to try to really look at things from a totally new kind of perspective. And that's what a real Talmid Chacham does. He doesn't just continue what he did. So many people are so invested in what they've done in the past that they can't actually move into the future because they've invested themselves entirely in what they've done yesterday and the day before. How can I leave that? That's a truly humble person doesn't care about what he did yesterday. That was yesterday. Today I'm going to come up with something entirely new. That's what I said about the Alter Rebbe yesterday. He started explaining Tanya, the Igeres HaTeshuva totally differently. The Rambam, every time he came a new halacha, I negated what he said before. It didn't matter. If I understand it differently today, I must try to understand differently today. It doesn't matter what I said yesterday. It makes no difference.
You mean you need to completely unlearn principles, or you need to take the essential?
You have to unlearn the certain kind. Tachlis, it means not being plagued by the kind of logic that you had before. Look, lahavdil, again, I'll give you an example. Einstein, for example, came up with his theory of relativity. The reason why he was able to come up with it is because until then, everyone was thinking in terms of gravity meaning a certain thing. They thought of gravity as being the attraction of two bodies, right?
He came with that concept, he never would have.
Right. Correct. And the number, there was a lot of problems with that, but they accepted it anyway. What's the problem? The major problem with it is that how do two objects which have got nothing to do with each other and are so distant away from, how can they actually interact with each other? How can one thing which is so far away from another thing actually interact with it? It's not touching it. What's holding it? So force at the distance was a big problem. But everyone accepted it. He was prepared to throw it away. Totally throw it away. What we think as that the apple is falling down to the earth, right? Because the earth is pulling the apple, Einstein threw away that. It's wrong. I know you taught it in school, but it's still wrong. The reason I teach it in school is because it's easier to understand, but it's wrong. Okay, that's not Einstein's theory of relativity.
Lucky I work
And
with
that-
10-year-olds.
and that's not-
They
and that's-
challenge that too.
And that's not general. That's not general relativity either. It doesn't work according to the Einstein's theory. It doesn't work. So he was able to think of something totally new. And what the Rebbe says is as lahavdil. I think it applies to Rebbe, I don't know how much it applies to me. But the Rebbe says it applies to us too. But the idea is to be able to constantly come up with something totally new, right? But when you're doing that, you need to be able to discard the past. And as a result of that, you're saying, "Wow, I don't understand anything," and then all of a sudden you have to relearn everything all over again. How are we able to relearn? Why are you able to do it? So I said yesterday, because every day God brings more and new wisdom into the world, right? So then you can now grasp that new wisdom. There's a famous story with the Beis Yosef. So the same story with the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef says, worked for months and months and months in Sfas trying to understand the concept. He finally figures it out, right? He finally figures it out. And he comes to Beis HaMedrash next day and he sees a simple Jew learning Gemara. And this Jew learning Gemara basically came up with the same idea. It took him months and months to figure it out. And he's feeling really bad about himself. This guy figured it out in a second. So, the Beis Yosef, a Maggid used to come to him and explain things to him. And he says, listen, you have to worry about it. Because you are mamshich. You brought into the world this new concept. Now everyone has access to it. So that's really what is happening when the Talmid Chacham, he's really discovering, because there's new light coming into the world. So this new light, it's a totally new light. Was it there at Har Sinai? Yeah, it was totally there. It was there at Har Sinai. of course, but it was very, very
That's what
deeply
Mrs.
there
Letter
in
was
Har
asking
Sinai.
as well.
It's like, the Mashal it says in Chassidus, and the Mashal it says in Chassidus is, for example, is there fire in a flintstone? Now, flintstone can create fire. You rub them together. But is there actual fire there? No. No fire. It's not hot. But there's a certain
There's a
kind
potential
of Igeres, a certain kind of potential for fire. So yes, everything was there in Har Sinai, right? Everything is there. And the Torah that we have, everything is there. And although everything is there, when the Talmud Chacham comes up with it, it's something which is new. It's not just evolutionary, it's revolutionary. Because he doesn't just develop what was there before. He actually comes along and takes from a newer state. And the Rebbe says in the Maimah, therefore, when a person is actually studying something very deeply with his understanding, we say Binah, he can sometimes come up with ideas which in the Chokhmah which preceded the Binah weren't there. Now normally Chokhmah is the first initial, grasp on it, and that's developed, right, into Binah. But sometimes in the state of Binah you can get the source of Chokhmah, you can get the depths of Chokhmah, which are not in the revealed state of Chokhmah, right? So therefore, why is that? The reason for that is because Seichel comes from L'mayla min Seichel. If Seichel was an absolute, was the real truth, right? Then how can you get? How can you do? But Seichel is constantly midas chadish. The reason why Seichel is there is because God's creating the Seichel. So the Eibush is bringing into the world a new Seichel, a new insight. Then you now have the opportunity of grasping that new insight. Before that new insight was brought into the world, you couldn't grasp that new insight, right? Because Seichel is not something which is absolute as we think it is. Seichel is really coming something from which is beyond Seichel. And why is this so important? It's important is because we don't get kind of too flustered every time we see this. It has to be that way. This is what science says, etc. Well, science has said many things, and then later on they've understood it in a deeper and a deeper and a deeper level, because not everything is open. And not everything can be understood. We have to, as human beings, we're supposed to understand. Now, why did the Eibishter make it that we should understand with our seichel that killing is wrong or that stealing is wrong? Because the Eibishter wants our seichel to understand it. But the Eibishter created the seichel through the mitzvah. The seichel doesn't create the mitzvah creates the seichel. And the Eibishter wants us to understand the mitzvah, so therefore he put the mitzvah in a manner that could be understood by creating the seichel around the mitzvah. So it's not that the seichel is a source of the mitzvah, the seichel is the dressing around the mitzvah. We'll leave it there for today.
This is even the concept of sickness to some degree, right?
Again?
That every sickness that's created has a cure. We're just yet to find it yet, right?
Everything which is created has a
cure. Every sickness that is created has a cure.
has a cure.
Has a cure already. We're just yet to
Right,
know it,
right.
discover it.
And the Mitzvah Hashem, listen, the main thing is that we need to discover Mashiach, and we're coming to Gimel Tammuz tomorrow night. So tomorrow night we will actually start the Shir in Tanya, in Perek Daled, and I will connect it, in Mitzvah Hashem, Be'ezras Hashem, I'll connect it with the idea of Gimel Tammuz as well.
That's
Okay?
tomorrow night.
Tomorrow here, today.
Tomorrow here.
Yeah.
Beautiful.